By the power of Grayskull, this is going to be a ride. He-Man has punched his way through gaming history for decades, from chunky pixels on the Atari 2600 to modern consoles brushing shoulders with the PS5 era. Some games were truly heroic. Some were, let's say, ambitious. In this video, I'll be exploring every He-Man game ever made. What they tried, what worked, and what absolutely didn't. If you grew up with Eternia, or you're just discovering it now, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Masters of the Universe, the power of He-Man. Alright, let's start at the very beginning. Masters of the Universe, the power of He-Man. This is where He-Man's gaming journey actually begins. All the way back in 1983, hitting both the Intellivision and the Atari 2600. Developed and published by Mattel, you might think this was just a licensed cash-in, but this was Mattel planting a flag and saying, yes, our barbarian prince belongs in video games. The game splits itself into two very different halves. First, you're flying the Wind Raider towards Castle Grayskull in a horizontally scrolling shooter section. Fuel is limited, fireballs flood the screen, and Skeletor casually jogs along the ground like he's late for an evil meeting. You're dropping bombs, firing shots, and trying not to waste fuel. Then the game switches gears completely. He-Man lands and chases Skeletor on foot, blocking lightning bolts with a shield and pushing through screen after screen before the timer runs out. The Atari 2600 version pulls off a surprisingly slick transformation screen. And yes, you even get a rough stab at the Masters theme. Sprites are chunky but readable, colors pop, and the UI is simple default. Controls though? I mean, that's where things wobble. The Wind Raider physics feel floaty and awkward, almost like the world moves around you instead of the other way around. The on-foot section is slower, but more forgiving. And honestly, touching Skeletor to win feels hilariously on brand. I tried it the other day, and playing it today is rough, but fascinating. It's historically important as the first He-Man game, and you can feel the ambition. What aged well is the presentation and the structure. What didn't is the clunky control logic and trial and error design. This is less a timeless classic and more a crucial fossil. For fans, it's essential. For everyone else, it's a museum piece with muscles. Masters of the Universe, the Super Adventure. This one might be the strangest He-Man game ever made. And honestly, that's exactly why it's fascinating. Released in 1986 for home computers like the BBC Micro, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum, I feel like the Super Adventure ditches action entirely. No sword swings, no Wind Raiders. Just you, a keyboard, and Eternia living inside paragraphs of text. Developed by Adventure Soft and published by US Gold, this is a classic interactive fiction game. No button mashing here, people. You actually type commands. You read, and you imagine. Not sure if this is gonna fly now, but this is the 80s we're talking about. The entire experience leans into the fantasy of being in Eternia rather than controlling a sprite version of He-Man. Locations, characters, and threats are all described in detail, and your progress depends on how well you understand the world and phrase your actions. The presentation is bare bones by design. Text dominates the screen, sometimes paired with minimal illustrations depending on the platform. The UI is old-school parser logic, which means the game expects precision. Type the wrong verb, and He-Man suddenly forgets how doors work. Sound is almost non-existent, but silence weirdly helps. Your brain fills the clashing swords, Skeletor's voice, and the Master's theme without the game ever playing it. For players who grew up in the 80s yelling, "I have the power!" at the TV and daydreaming about Eternia, this feels personal. It's slow, thoughtful, and surprisingly immersive, even for someone like me. And trust me, my attention span is questionable. It's not perfect, and it's absolutely not for everyone. But when it clicks, it's genuinely great fun. And for a He-Man game, this might be the most powerful choice of all. Masters of the Universe, the arcade game. Now, this is where He-Man finally starts feeling like an arcade hero, even though it never really actually lived in an arcade. Masters of the Universe, the arcade game, launched in 1987, developed by Adventure Soft and published by US Gold, hitting systems like the Amstrad CPC, BBC Micro, ZX Spectrum, and Commodore 64, where it was also known as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the Isler's Stone. Right out of the gate, this one gives you a proper mission. Skeletor has taken control of Castle Grayskull, kidnapped the sorceress, and made himself untouchable using the Isler's Stone. He-Man can't just punch his way through this time. To win, you have to explore, fight through Skeletor's minions, and hunt down specific ingredients scattered across the levels to upgrade the Power Sword into the legendary Atom Smasher. Grab the wrong item though, and the game laughs at you by resetting your progress. Old school cruelty, fully intact. Sprites are chunky but expressive. Environments actually feel like fantasy locations instead of abstract boxes. And enemy variety keeps things moving. The UI is simple and readable, and performance is mostly solid, though difficulty spikes can feel sudden. Sound effects do the job, and while the music isn't iconic, it pushes that late 80s fantasy vibe hard. Playing it today, it still holds up as a tough but rewarding platformer, especially for fans who enjoy methodical progression. If we talk about legacy, this is important because it finally made He-Man feel like a proper action platform lead and not just a licensed experiment. Pure 80s fantasy nostalgia, sharp edges and all. Masters of the Universe, the movie. 1987 for Amstrad CPC, C64, MSX, ZX Spectrum. This one wears its movie tie-in badge proudly. Whether you think that's a flex or a warning sign depends completely on your tolerance for 80s chaos. Masters of the Universe, the movie, arrived in 1987, developed and published by Gremlin Graphics, and it's directly based on Gary Goddard's live-action film. Yes, the one with Dolph Lundgren as He-Man and Frank Langella chewing the scenery as Skeletor. Their faces are right there in the box, selling the fantasy hard. This game landed on the Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and MSX, with the MSX release simply titled Masters of the Universe. Designed by Rob Toon, programmed by Christian P. Shrigley, with art by Terry Lloyd and music by the legendary Ben Daglish, this one leans into action-adventure with strong run-and-gun energy. You're basically blasting through levels inspired by the movie, switching between Eternia-style environments and Earth-based chaos, fighting Skeletor's forces while you're trying to survive waves of enemies that clearly did not get the memo about balance. Sprites, backgrounds, everything just comes together in a very late 80s way. The UI is functional, but not elegant, and the controls can feel stiff when things get hectic. Or maybe it was just me because my emulator barely got the job done. The soundtrack is one of the big highlights. Ben Daglish delivers music that feels epic even when the gameplay stumbles. Playing it today feels like wrestling with ambition. It's rough, punishing, and occasionally unfair, but it's also dripping with personality. This one captures the exact moment He-Man tried to go full multimedia. Toy line, cartoon, movie, and game all colliding at once. He-Man, Power of Grayskull. This one feels like He-Man finally stepping into the handheld era and actually belonging there. He-Man, Power of Grayskull launched in October 2002 exclusively for the Game Boy Advance, developed by Conoco and published by TDK Media Active. After years of experimental and sometimes messy adaptations, this game came in with a clear goal: make Eternia playable in a modern, structured way. The game uses an isometric action perspective, which immediately gives it more of a tactical feel than the older side-scrollers. Instead of one big quest, the story is broken into focused missions where He-Man rescues his allies one by one. And here, you're not chasing Skeletor all mindlessly. You're rebuilding the heroic warriors. From saving Cringer and Teela to pushing deep into Snake Mountain, the structure feels deliberate and surprisingly faithful to the cartoon's spirit. Characters actually look like themselves. Locations like Castle Grayskull and Snake Mountain feel distinct, and the UI stays out of the way. Performance is smooth, combat is responsive, and enemy variety keeps things from going stale. The soundtrack by Alistair Brimble deserves a special mention. It doesn't mimic the Filmation score directly, but it captures that heroic, high-energy fantasy tone perfectly. The game is not brutally hard, but it's not brainless either. If you try it today, it still feels decent because the controls hold up and the mission-based design suits short play sessions. And it's one of the first times He-Man felt properly adapted for a post-90s audience.
Intruder. He-Man has breached the walls of Snake Mountain. Reinforcements needed.
Skeletor, come out and show yourself!
He-Man, Defender of Grayskull. Our next game is where He-Man finally went big budget. 3D console era. He-Man, Defender of Grayskull landed on the PlayStation 2 as a PAL exclusive around 2003-2004, and it's often mixed up with the much better 2002 GBA game. Don't do that. They are very different beasts. This is a third-person 3D action-adventure clearly inspired by early PS2-era hack-and-slash design. You explore Eternia, fight Skeletor's forces, platform across cliffs, and occasionally ride Battlecat, which sounds amazing on paper. Combat gives He-Man his Sword of Grayskull, shield, and even a battle axe, plus a special meter you're supposed to manage for stronger attacks. In theory, this should feel powerful. In practice, it's clunky, sluggish, and weirdly punishing. I mean, He-Man falls into water and dies. He-Man misses a jump and dies. What's up with that? The most powerful man in the universe is extremely fragile. The camera is the real villain here. It fights you constantly, especially during platforming sections, and the combat loop quickly becomes repetitive. Enemies soak up hits, special moves rarely feel worth the effort, and the game loves the classic find key, clear enemies, repeat structure. I finished the entire thing in about 3 to 4 hours, and by the end, it felt longer than it actually is. Now, credit where it's due. When it comes to visuals, for its time, it's decent. Eternia looks like Eternia, and the voice acting is solid, pulling directly from the 2002 animated series, with Cam Clark and the rest of the cast adding authenticity that the gameplay desperately needs. This was He-Man's first real attempt at a modern 3D console adventure. Unfortunately, it landed in that awkward PS2 zone where ambition outpaced polish. Today, it's really only recommended for hardcore Masters fans who want to experience every corner of Eternia, jank and all. MUGEN, Castle Grayskull stage, fan MUGEN content. This isn't a game in the traditional sense, but it absolutely earns its place in He-Man's gaming history. MUGEN Castle Grayskull Stage 2009 is a fan-made fighting stage created for the MUGEN engine, and it represents the moment Eternia fully crossed into the community-driven creativity. Released around 2009, this isn't something you boot up from a menu or buy on a store page. It's a downloadable stage file, a background arena designed specifically to host one-on-one fights between custom characters. Drop He-Man, Skeletor, or any wild crossover fighter into it, and suddenly Castle Grayskull becomes a battleground rather than a backdrop. The goal is clear: recreate the iconic skull-faced fortress in all its ominous glory. Most versions lean into a dark sky, glowing energy effects, flickering torches, and subtle animation loops that make the castle feel alive. Some builds include rumbling effects or floating orbs to sell that ancient power atmosphere. It's not Filmation accurate down to the pixel, but it doesn't need to be. I'm including this one because something about it just feels right. And in MUGEN, that matters more than polish. From a technical standpoint, it's classic MUGEN structure. DEF file, sprite assets, optional animation data, all placed into the Stages folder. That's why it spreads so widely. Once installed, it works across countless custom rosters and screen packs. He-Man, the most powerful game in the universe. If you ever wanted a He-Man game that feels like it was built to be played in the back of a car, in bed, or secretly during class, this is the one. He-Man, the most powerful game in the universe, hit iOS in October 2012, then showed up on Android in 2013 with the slightly trimmed title, He-Man, the most powerful game. It was developed by Canada's Glitchsoft and published by Chilingo, which basically tells you the vibe right away. Punchy, colorful, and designed for quick sessions. The core loop is simple in the best way. You slash through waves of Skeletor's goons across 7 regions of Eternia, rack up combos like that satisfying 7-hit chain, then scoop up gems to buy power-ups between levels. And the game knows you want the toy box fantasy, so it lets you summon allies like Man-at-Arms, Orko, and the Sorceress to jump into fights. Boss list is pure Saturday morning comfort food. Beastman, Trapjaw, Merman, Hordak, and of course Skeletor himself. Visually, it leans hard into cartoony charm. Bright sprites, chunky animations, readable UI, and that tap-friendly layout that screams mobile without feeling cheap. Performance is mostly smooth, but the controls are where opinions split. I loved the scheme and the challenge, but it wasn't quite as fast or fluid. I feel like it lands in the middle overall, a strong nostalgia hit, packed with winks and self-aware humor, even if the level design can get repetitive and enemies don't exactly have galaxy brain AI. It's not deep, but it's fun. Also, later updates adding She-Ra and King Hiss boss were a smart way to keep fans hooked.
Is there anyone that can bring peace to Eternia? What's going on over there? I must bring peace to Eternia!
Toy Soldiers War Chest. This one is sneaky because He-Man doesn't headline the box. Instead, he kicks the door in as a guest army inside Toy Soldiers War Chest, released in August 2015 for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. Developed by Signal Studios and published by Ubisoft, this was the moment He-Man quietly joined a modern strategy game without swinging a single sword in a traditional action format. War Chest itself is a hybrid of tower defense and real-time strategy set inside a literal toy box battlefield. You build turrets, upgrade armor and fire rates separately, control hero units directly, and react to smarter enemy AI that reroutes when bridges collapse or prioritizes smashing your defenses. It's methodical, reactive, and surprisingly tactical. Then comes the Hall of Fame edition, priced at $29.99, which is where Eternia enters the picture. The He-Man army is part of the licensed roster alongside G.I. Joe and Assassin's Creed characters. Powered by Grayskull, this faction leans into brute strength and heroic presence. He-Man himself functions as a hero unit, supported by Eternian warriors and Battle Cat, defending the toy box from waves of darkness. Visually, it's a perfect fit. Plastic textures, exaggerated proportions, and toy-like animations make He-Man feel like an action figure brought to life rather than a gritty reboot. Kevin Riepel's score keeps the energy high, while sound effects emphasize that playful war room vibe. Most people liked the customization and licensed flair, but felt balance issues and repetition held it back. Playing it today, the He-Man content still feels novel because it's not trying to retell lore or retread old ground. This one matters because it marks He-Man's return to relevance in the HD era, not as a standalone star, but as a flexible pop culture icon dropped into a genre that never expected him. And honestly, that toy box battlefield suits him just fine.
By the crystal tassel.
Both Eternia and Etheria will be mine.
Now is the time for cunning. Consider
Tappers of Grayskull. Keep tapping like Eternia depended on it. That is basically what our next game asked the players. He-Man Tappers of Grayskull was a mobile action RPG built for iOS and Android, launching around late 2016 and quietly disappearing sometime in 2018. And yeah, that rise and vanish arc pretty much defines the entire experience. Right away, the premise goes big. Skeletor finds an ancient sorcerer's stone that lets him turn himself and his forces into towering giants. And suddenly, Eternia has a kaiju problem. The solution? You. Tapping. A lot. Gameplay is classic idle tapper DNA. You hammer enemies, trigger abilities, summon allies, collect loot, upgrade stats, repeat. But where this game genuinely tried was presentation. It leaned hard into 80s Masters nostalgia, with colorful art, exaggerated enemy designs, and full voice acting, including Alan Oppenheimer and Cam Clark, which instantly gave it authenticity. Content-wise, it was stacked. Over 20 allies including He-Man, staples like Teela, Man-at-Arms, and She-Ra. Dozens of artifacts. Around 12 locations across Eternia. There was always something unlocking, something upgrading, something flashing on screen asking for attention. The UI was busy but readable, clearly designed for short bursts rather than long, thoughtful sessions. Of course, it was still a free-to-play mobile game, and that came with baggage. Progress slowed unless you engaged with in-app purchases, and long-term play leaned heavily on grind and events. By 2018, support faded, updates stopped, and the game shut down completely, making it unplayable today outside of videos and memories. The game shows how flexible the He-Man brand had become by the 2010s. Eternia wasn't locked to cartridges or discs anymore. It could exist as a constantly updating, event-driven experience designed for quick sessions and long-term grind. Even though the game didn't last, it proves He-Man could still adapt to changing gaming habits without losing his identity. For VR, Masters of the Universe VR, a Mattel VR viewer tie-in with the He-Man branding. This one is less about button mashing and more about standing inside your childhood. ViewMaster Masters of the Universe VR dropped on November 1st, 2016 for iOS and Android, developed by Frema Studio and published by Mattel, built specifically for the ViewMaster VR headset. Yes, that ViewMaster. The red one. Eternia through plastic lenses was suddenly a real thing. Instead of putting you directly in He-Man's boots, the game flips the setup. Skeletor has captured He-Man and is draining the power of the Elders, basically setting up an Eternia-wide apocalypse. You're summoned by the Sorceress, tasked with rescuing He-Man and then fighting alongside him. You look around, explore environments, interact with objects, and experience Eternia in 360 degrees. Castle interiors, enemy encounters, and story beats are all framed to make you feel present rather than powerful. It does a solid job within mobile VR limits. Environments are stylized and readable. Characters are simplified but recognizable, and performance stays smooth enough to avoid motion sickness. UI elements are kept minimal and float naturally in the world. Sound design pulls a lot of weight here, using voice acting and ambient audio to sell the fantasy. The narrative was clearly handled with care, written by someone who genuinely loved Masters of the Universe, and it shows in the dialogue and tone. Playing it today feels more like a guided VR story than a traditional game. There's not much depth or replay value, but that's not really the point. This mattered because it was He-Man stepping into VR experimentation early, treating Eternia as a place to visit rather than a level to clear. Short, sincere, and built almost entirely on affection for the license. And for our next entry, let's take a look at this upcoming release.
At last, Castle Grayskull is mine!
Not so fast, Skeletor.
Whoa, what's happening? He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Dragon Cruel Destruction coming soon to all platforms?
Masters of the Universe, Dragon Pearl of Destruction. This is where the future of He-Man games start looking very deliberate. Dragon Pearl of Destruction is an upcoming 2D action brawler from Bitmap Bureau, published by Limited Run Games, and while it doesn't have a release date yet, it's supposed to be out sometime in 2026. The intent behind it is already very clear. The setup leans into classic Eternia stakes. Skeletor is attempting an ancient ritual tied to the Dragon Pearl, one that could plunge the world into darkness, and He-Man isn't facing it alone. The game is designed around a small but iconic roster, including He-Man, Teela, and Man-at-Arms, with a strong emphasis on two-player co-op. Everything shown so far points to Bitmap Bureau doing what they're known for. Large, highly detailed pixel art sprites, heavy animation frames, and effects that emphasize physical impact and magical power without overwhelming the screen. It's explicitly retro-inspired, but not minimalist. The art direction is aiming to do justice to Eternia rather than imitate early hardware limitations. From what it looks like, I feel the game is being positioned as a hard-hitting magic brawler, mixing classic beat-em-up fundamentals with character-specific specials and large-scale magical attacks. If it lands the combat feel and pacing, this could easily become the modern benchmark for how Eternia works in 2D. So that's the full journey. Triumphs, misfires, cult classics, and forgotten experiments, all tied together by one barbarian with a sword and a legacy. Now I want to hear from you. Which He-Man game did you actually play, and which one surprised you the most today? Drop your pick in the comments, argue your case, defend your favorite, or roast the worst one. And if Eternia still has a place in your heart, you already know what to do. Smash that like button if Eternia still rules your childhood. Drop a comment telling me which He-Man game you actually played, and hit subscribe so we keep exploring legends like this.